Leadership communication. You may have realized in the past that leaders on, let's say, different levels didn't do too great when it came to their efforts of communication. I'll just give you a couple of examples because we always want to keep it relevant for the real world practice. You may have heard about Boris Johnson doing the brief joke during Prime Minister's question time when he was talking to Keir Starmer or answering a question of Keir Starmer. He said that the leader of the opposition has to be clearer in his communication, not jump around from one position to the other. He needs a clearer brief because at the moment he seems to have more briefs than Calvin Klein. Yeah, that happened during Prime Minister's question time. And we all know that British humour can cross lines. But let's face it, making jokes in the middle of a pandemic with thousands and thousands of people piling up the death numbers, and especially as a country which is not particularly doing well, this, with no surprise at all, didn't go down too well with the people. But we even have leadership communication failures in other countries. So when we just go over the channel to Germany, just recently in Thüringen, which is in the center, in the middle of Germany, there's a local parliament. The local prime minister, Bodo Ramelow, who's the leader of a rather left-wing party and the local prime minister there, gave a speech, and it was a speech where they were talking about the investigation on the NSU. The NSU is a terrorist organization which they discovered in recent years, the National Socialist Underground. I'm not making this up. There are new Nazis rising in Germany. They found out who they were after they killed a couple of people, did a couple of terrorist attacks, and then they jailed people. 2 of them killed themselves. So he then gets interrupted. So he gives a speech about this issue and about how the investigation is going on and what to do, what are the next steps. And then a leader of the AfD, which is the equivalent to UKIP, a far right-wing party, interrupts him. And Stefan Möller, a politician of that far right-wing party, makes a couple of, let's say, not great comments. And the local Prime Minister, Bodo Ramelow, stops his speech, looks at this person, shows him the middle finger, and calls him a disgusting scumbag. This is the moment where probably Brits now fell off their chair and thought, that didn't happen in Parliament. Yes, it did happen in Parliament. Some Brits or Americans may even say, well, that's what we think German communication is like. And yes, we had a couple of these things in German parliaments happening. There's a very different communication and way more stricter rules, what is considered unparliamentary language. And of course, even in Germany, that is unparliamentary language. Bodo Ramelow afterwards said that what he said there doesn't reflect well and was unacceptable in respect to the dignity of the House of the Parliament, but didn't apologize to the person. I can just tell you from my point of view, although I do not recommend to use these kind of words, swear words always mean you have no other means of communication to answer someone's, let's say, utterance towards you. Swear words always are a bit desperate when it comes to communication. There are always better words to make your words count. When you have to swear, it simply means you ran out of rhetorical means. Still, as my grandfather was in concentration camp, my family was a resistance fighting family during the Third Reich and during Nazi Germany. I, of course, by myself, wouldn't apologize in any way to someone who's a member of a far right-wing organization, but that's a different story. If it comes to leadership communication, you must be very careful what you say, because every word you can say suddenly everything you said before may sound either irrelevant, made up, or even make it look like an utter lie. I give you an example just in the UK. Maybe you remember that we went on the street in the midst of the pandemic when we had the lockdown. At least once a week in different countries, we had different days. We went on the street and clapped. Say, yeah, clap for carers. We clap for the NHS. We clap for carers. And we tell them how great they are. Still, not a single penny of salary rise so far. In Germany, we had a couple of hospitals cutting not only vacations, but also payments for their carers due to different kind of reasoning the management gave them. And Matt Hancock, the Secretary of Health in the UK, was just confronted over parking charges for NHS staff, which means on the one hand, they tell you, oh, you're so great, you're saving the country in the midst of a pandemic. Could you please pay for your parking when you go to work? Many people who listen to this podcast will work in free enterprise. And if you would think about having to pay for your parking when you go to work, you would tell your boss, I think you just missed the plot. You just lost the plot. Because people who say that obviously have. You can't say on the one hand that everything is so great and much needed and you are the heroes of the country, and just a couple of weeks later you say, sorry, no salary rise, sorry, no bonus. Oh, by the way, could you please pay for your parking when you come to work? And the pandemic is still going on. At the same time, while you have a really high death toll, you call this a big success, like Boris Johnson did. And what really happened there is that people wondered, like James O'Brien from LBC, leading Britain's Conversation, a very factual-based journalist, he said, if this, what we have here in the UK, is a big success, how does the catastrophe look like? No answer for that. Of course, and by the way, if you now think I'm just one of these leftists, I'm not. I'm not politically left-wing. I'm a self-employed entrepreneur. In German politics, you find me in between the liberal and conservative spectrum, and in the UK, I even campaigned for conservative politics under David Cameron. I don't support Boris Johnson particularly because I don't like his rhetoric, which are, in my opinion, rather populist. But as a self-employed entrepreneur, of course, I favor a smaller state and a lower taxation, which is probably the definition of conservative politics. But I don't have to support someone from a certain party only because they support a certain politics that might be in favor of me. If it's not sustainable, I can't support it. And here we have just numerous cases of leadership miscommunication. Bolsonaro, that far right-wing populist, the president in Brazil said, and I quote word by word, COVID-19 is something for faggots. That is what a national president said. What we really need now is a new approach to leadership communication. We have different problems to address and we have different solutions for these problems. So first, we have to step away from ideological or ideologic communication. What does that mean? So normally, I just give you an example. Normally when you come from school and you go to university, then you normally have a certain expectation what you want to do in life. And of course, organizations have a certain expectation what you should bring to the table. So today that often looks like, please have a bachelor's degree, preferably a master's degree, maybe something with distinction, which would be really great. And I just give you an example of a friend of mine who did all this. He has a bachelor's degree at a very good university in his field. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in his field, master's degree with distinction. Between the bachelor's and the master's, he worked 3 years, self-employed, worked with large corporates exactly in that area. A brilliant person when it comes to marketing and sales. And then he now works in the city of London. And just think of what I just told you. Bachelor's degree, master's degree, 3 years of real world experience, of work experience. So someone really knows how the outside world there, the real world works. It's not someone who came from uni, who never saw an office from the inside. And there he is now on £25,000 a year. What do you expect people to give you as a commitment when you give them, after all what they've done to get there, £25,000 a year, which is, sorry for the words, a joke. If you expect, and often we have the same problem, as people from free enterprise, we hope that people do a vote that supports free enterprise, which means most likely we hope that people vote either for liberals or for conservatives. People will vote more and more left-winged when they suddenly see that all their support ends up them being exploited for really low salaries after everything they have done before, working for people who have done way less in their life, earning double the salary simply because they were born 2 decades earlier. And it looks like that it doesn't get better after COVID-19. So, and then of course we tell people, oh, you can't vote for left-wing parties because they're all socialists and communists and yada, yada, yada. And people just look there. And then you have leaders like Keir Starmer in the UK, or we have left-wing leaders in different other countries. We have Mr. Sanchez in Spain. We have different leaders who simply go by facts and just remove these conservative and liberal governments. And suddenly here we are as self-employed people in free enterprise, seeing our taxes go through the roof. And that all happened because we failed in leadership communication. When I see how often people book me now for either workshops or coaching, I see that people suddenly realize we have to change a bit. But that is just the beginning. Leadership communication has massive problems. So I give you 3 very specific problems. I already gave you the first one. The first one is stop to do ideological communication. When you tell people that is the only political direction which support our business, you can't vote anything else, people will fact check and they will find out that most likely it is not true. Because in most countries, you have another party which is still centrist enough that does at least not support the system you support, which probably you only support because it brought you in the position you are right now. And that, by the way, applies to me as well. I'm in a comfortable position, 21 years self-employment, so which is a rather comfortable and very safe and sound position. Of course, I like when taxation is lower and the state has less regulation put upon me, but I also have to see that we don't lose future and upcoming generations because they will see something's wrong in the system. So problem number 1, stop to do ideological communication. Of course, with all 3 problems I named you, I'm going to tell you the solution straight after. But first, the problems. Problem number 1, ideological communication. Step number 2 is humor. When you use humor, so first to our German listeners, we don't have humor. Not really relevant for us, also not really part of our culture. In other countries, especially in the UK, people tend to use humor. But when you do humor today, people often say, oh, anyone is offended by everything. No, that's not the case. Absolutely not. People just stop to accept when you do inappropriate humor. And inappropriate humor is when you are part of a privileged class or a privileged part of society, and you make fun of a non-privileged part. When you are the Prime Minister of the UK and you make brief jokes, brief Calvin Klein jokes in the midst of a pandemic about people who died, people will call you out on it. The best humor that works is self-deprecating humor. Make jokes about yourself, about your own group, your own people. That's the humor that always works. If you're unsure about should I use humor in a speech, yes or no, humor became not offensive because of people becoming more sensible. Humor became unacceptable in certain communication and certain contexts because people found out that this kind of humor is only a justification to give you some sort of reasoning to talk down on people and make fun of them. That is why you need to take care about what humor you use. And by the way, that's not even new. If that is new to you, you most likely have offended hundreds and hundreds of people who now will not support you anymore. The time that people sit there and say, oh, that's the leader, I'm not going to say anything, these times are over. First, people will address it. Second, people will leave your organization because people leave people. People don't leave organizations. They don't want to work for organizations that are non-diverse and make these kind of old golf club jokes. I give you again the example of Monzo. Monzo, a bank completely founded newly just a couple of years ago. And now you can say the banking world is reasonably competitive. It is highly competitive. And Monzo succeeded in the city of London. Go to the UK, ask any person younger than 35. 80% of them will have Monzo card because they say that's a bank that does everything right. My normal bank does not. And by the way, this Monzo bank is very diverse. They don't have these leaders who make these inappropriate comments, and they don't have these old-fashioned approaches where they think, I do something and you have to obey. So, step number 1, problem number 1 is ideological communication. Stop doing it. Step number 2, when you use humor, use self-deprecating humor. Anything else is a dangerous road to go down. I recommend you either to seek for professionals who can help you with it, or if in doubt, leave it out. No matter how funny you think it is, most likely when you think it's funny and it's about other people, these people will not appreciate the joke. And problem number 3 is one-way management has to stop. And one-way management it's like a street that only goes one way. And when we talk about these one-way streets, it simply means that you say, oh, we've done that in the past, and that's why we need to do it in the future. Just go on different corporate websites, and then you have at least one button where you can click our leadership team, our CEO team, our board of directors, and then you click on this button, and what it says there is, this is our leadership team dedicated to blah, 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 then the usual marketing chumbawamba. So you look at the pictures, and most likely you will see people who all even look alike. Not only that they most likely all come from the same background, same network, even same regions, they also look alike. And that's the point where people simply say, this brand can never reflect on my needs. New brands succeed because they understood that when you have to talk about different issues, you have to talk to different people. I'll just give you an example. A couple of years ago, we had huge discussions, many discussions in the United States, which bathroom can a transsexual person use? And then, of course, people said, as if we have no other problems, but that's a different story. And I had no answer, and I can tell you why. First, I am not transsexual. Second, I never thought of the issue, most likely because I'm not transsexual. And third, I didn't even know how to solve it. Do we have like a transsexual bathroom, but when they are trans men, trans women, how do we, question mark. So what I did is I talked to a transsexual person who told me what the issue is, how distressing it can be that you don't really fit into the binary gender model. It's not about people becoming offended by everything. It's about society being insensible, and leadership teams not acting properly on target groups which you want to win as a client. When you look into new circle of friends of younger people, they don't stick to the categories we grew up with. And when we still say, these are our categories, hello customer, do you want to buy it? They won't. You are ruining your brand's reputation by one-way management. So 3 main problems. 1, ideological communication. 2, human inappropriate places. And 3, one-way management. So how to overcome this? So step number 1, to do something better, step away from ideological communication, and you have to go into factual communication. And now, of course, some people will say, but factual communication is rather dry and boring. We get to that in the next step. So first, everything you say must be backed by facts. That in the recent past became a bit out of fashion, especially in politics for whatever reason, and people just stopped to even refer to facts, but just peddle out their opinion there. As long as you do this, people will leave your organization and you will lose customers, especially in the next 5, 10, 15 years. Major brands who do not develop to the new management level and the new management of diversity will lose market share in a way that they will struggle to recover from that. Some already started to have initiatives, but it takes a while until they really get their speed on the ground, or basically they get off the ground. And also we have to question, is it an honest approach or is it just an approach which is driven by economical interest? So step number 1, step away from ideological communication, go to factual communication. If you don't want to be boring, which I can fully understand because no one wants to listen to boring communication from leaders, step number 2, step away from inappropriate humor and learn how to communicate professionally. And that is something which I see leaders and senior executives start to understand. I'll just give you an example. When I look into the last 2 years, I have 5 times more inquiries to be booked to coach people, to deliver speeches, to do workshops for their leaders or sales team or marketing team on how to communicate. I have way more inquiries and bookings when it comes to leadership communication compared to the time before. So people see that there is a need, that there must be different communication towards different groups of clients, that society change and you have to address different issues, that society change and that they expect you to make the differentiation between these groups and not just have one approach which you push on the market and hope it's going to work. So step number 2, learn to be rhetorically brilliant. And by the way, that's a skill which you learn. I learned it, believe me. You don't want to hear my first speeches or my first seminars. That was just awful. About 20 years ago, I'm now 21 and a half years self-employed. If you really would listen to my very first speeches, no, not great. And step number 3, if you want to get away from one-way management, you have to make very clear statements. And these statements also include political statements. People want to hear, where do you draw the line of something being unacceptable? And they demand this from you for one simple reason. And that is something which especially left-wing people always throw in our faces. I am not left-wing, but they always say, if we look into history, the capital, the money, didn't really care where the money came from as long as they get the money. They do business with absolutely anyone as long as payment is okay. And unfortunately, if we look into historical facts and figures, that is unfortunately correct. So you have to make a very clear statement. Where do you draw the line of something being unacceptable? And that includes a political dimension. You don't have to say vote for X or don't vote for Z, but you have to say this is the political line where we draw. We stand up against, for example, discrimination. And then, for example, and that's, by the way, just a recent example, then you say Black Lives Matter for support of George Floyd. And you don't say all lives matter or make, and I read hundreds of these bland statements, oh, we stand up against any kind of discrimination, blah, blah, blah. That would be like, let's just imagine I would go to a church, and religious freedom is an important value in every society. I would go to a church during Christmas service and would say, come on guys, it's not about Christmas, all seasons matter. Or I go to the highest festivities of, let's say, a church when it's during Easter, and I say, come on, it's not about Jesus Christ. All religions matter. You would say, that's true, but that's not the issue right now. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. When the issue right now is that Black Lives Matter, you address that Black Lives Matter. When the issue right now, like in June, is that we have Pride Month, you make a clear statement about Pride Month. And by the way, if you don't, that also is a statement that you do not support the issue. But when you make bland statement, love is love, we all matter, blah, 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 that is just you trying to get away with absolutely anything. We need managers who have the courage to make very clear statements, because without a clear statement, there is no brand left. The core values of your brand only exist when you actually cut them out. So 3 problems you have to face. Step number 1, get away from ideological communication, step over to factual communication. I know it can be quite boring, but, and here we go for step number 2, step away from inappropriate humor and jokes that only you find funny with maybe your mates you know from university or your vocational training or even from your private circumstances. Step away from these kind of inappropriate jokes, humor, kind of buddy-mate communication, and go to excellent rhetorics, which, by the way, can still be funny, but then you have to be able to make the point and use humor in a very intelligent, very smart, often very dry and intelligent way. Normally you need professional training for that. Training, speaking, coaching, it can all be learned. I learned it. Just ask a professional. Of course, feel free to ask me. And step number 3, step away from one-way management, because one-way management will never work. Look into what is your leadership team right now. Look into your top 3 levels of leadership. And when you say, basically we all look the same, basically we all are the same background, same ideas, same way we work, then you will fail sooner or later. And that means you have to get away from one-way management and approach the diversity of society in your organization. But that includes that you make a very clear statement. Where do you draw the line? What is acceptable and what is unacceptable from you? And that includes a political dimension. I wish you all the best when implementing this in your organization. And for today, thank you very much for your time.